Basically, I'm here to talk to you about cargo liabilities, COGSA, carriage of goods, multiple names, mostly for the same thing. Since this can be kind of a dry topic, I've decided to use this duck to kind of stand for our cargo or our shipper. Has anybody, just before I start, who here is here to become a decky? Like, can you raise your hands? All right, the vast majority of you. Anyone here doing engineering? Nobody. No engineers in this class. All right, great. Anybody here who's doing like general studies and isn't sure what they're going to do after this? Just who here isn't here to be a decky?
Yeah, we have a couple.
All right, what are you guys here for? I'm sorry? You all want to be lawyers? Great, come talk to me after class. All right. So basically, how did all of these rules about the carriage of goods start? It started with basically an act called the Harder Act, which kind of came into place in 1893, and it is codified in the U.S. Code 46 U.S.C. 30701. I'm sure you all read about that before I got here. Because I don't like to talk too much, instead I'm going to ask you questions to see if you did your homework. So if you get the questions right, you do get candy. It is individually packaged, so hopefully you won't get coronavirus from it. So basically, here's your question. What did the Harder Act do? And it could be more than one of these, just a hint. Was it consumer protection law for transport to and from U.S. ports? And did it protect Ducky the shipper or cargo interests from unfair agreements? Did it give rise to international treaties and agreements pertaining to liabilities of carriers to cargo and shippers? Did it require a carrier to use due diligence to make a vessel seaworthy, properly man and equip the vessel, or did it provide for exceptions and limitations to a carrier's liability in specific circumstances? C? Anything else? Is that the only one? Who said all of the above? Yeah. All right, you all get points for that. That is the right answer. So they're all true. All right. Good answers, guys. All right. And you should know that these are really important to you even if you're going to be a decky, because one day somebody's going to come and they're going to want to look at your logs to see that you were looking at the cargo and making sure the temperature was right or that things were loaded correctly. And if your logs aren't right and you can't prove that stuff was in good condition, it's going to be your license on the hook. So you're going to want to pay attention so that when people come and ask you questions, you know how to respond. All right, so Hague-Visby Rules, 1924. All right, it's the International Convention for the Unification of Certain Rules Pertaining to Bills of Lading. Does everybody here know what a bill of lading is? What is it?
It's from a shipper to like a freight forwarder or something like that, and it has the cargo on it and all that, like the weight and stuff like that, and where it's going, where it's from.
Right, so you know who issues it usually?
Shipper.
The operator. The person who's operating the vessel or whoever's it, or a non-vessel operating common carrier. So the shipper's the person shipping, the person whose goods are going, and you get a candy just for answering the question. So shipper is the person who's actually shipping the goods, right? So I'm Corning Glassware and I'm shipping my glass to Japan so that somebody in Japan can make television sets. All right, they're the shipper. The consignee is, I don't know, Hitachi. Do they make TVs? Sony? Whoever's over there making TVs. All right? And then, obviously the carrier is somebody like Maersk, for instance. And so Maersk, or whoever's operating Maersk's vessels at the time, is going to be the one that's issuing the bill of lading. Sound good? All right, cool. So what did the Hague-Visby rules do? Another question. More candy is possible here. Did it bring about an international agreement on Ducky or the shipper's rights that was adopted by the U.S. and also other maritime trading partners or other countries? Was it amended twice in 68 and 79? Did it make it harder for shippers and cargo interests to recover money when their stuff was damaged? Or did it require all shippers to cover their cargo when transported? I'm sorry?
All of the above.
It's not exactly right. Anybody else?
None of the above. Is it everything except for C?
Close.
Oh. A and B.
A and B are both true.
And C.
All right, I'll say that C, it's art. I'll give you all that. Can someone just pass these back, because I can't throw that far. All right, cool. So A, B, and C are true. I think C is true. Some people maybe wouldn't agree with me, so I'll give you that one. But basically, your ducky here does have an interest in properly packaging their cargo, because if packaging was insufficient for the carriage, then they're not going to be able to recover anything against the issuer of the bill of lading. All right. Any questions about that? No? Okay. So COGSA, Carriage of Goods by Sea Act, that kind of came right after the Harder Act, and it kind of added a few more rules. Came out, basically was adopted in 1936. So what is COGSA? We've got 6 things here. Was it a way to allocate risk between the shipper and the carrier? Who thinks it was a way to allocate risk between the shipper and the carrier? All right, you guys are all right. I'll give out some candy at the end. Who thinks it limited liability to $500 a package, or unless there was a contract for a higher amount or a customary freight unit? All right, you're all right again. Who thinks that it governs transport from port to port? Very good. Who thinks that it's not really codified, but it's kind of a mix of case law and the code that was the Harder Act, and kind of blends a bunch of different things together until we got the laws the way they are today? Anybody thinks that it's not specifically codified anywhere? Yes, you're right. Good. Who thinks that it limits the time that suit can be brought for 1 year from the date of delivery? Oh, you all know that. All right, cool. And who thinks that the carrier needs to give 2 rates, a higher and a lower rate, in order for this liability limitation of $500 a package to apply? No?
Yes.
Yes. There always needs to be the option to pay a higher rate to cover more. And basically the shipper has to be able to declare the value of their cargo. Now, basically, just so you know, that bill of lading, which is always going to say that it's COGSA applies, which limits liability to $500 a package or a freight unit, is considered basically your proof that you were given the option to basically have 2 rates. So I've never seen this actually it's basically prima facie evidence that the shipper was given the option to pay a higher rate but chose this lower COGSA rate. All right, so they're all true. So I think you get this because you got everything. So you can pass that back. Great. So who thinks here that there was a delivery of cargo? This is a yes or no question. There's a delivery by the shipper. So Maersk delivers the cargo to an empty warehouse in Memphis. The warehouse is listed as the port of discharge on the bill of lading, Hong Kong to Memphis. Who thinks this is delivery? Good answer. All right. Now, B, delivery to consignee at a location 10 miles from the location listed for delivery on the bill of lading. The consignee signs for the goods and doesn't take any exception. All right. C, delivery to a port in Vallejo, California. The bill of lading is for a shipment to Novato, California. The consignee has a separate facility in Vallejo. Okay. D, the vessel was struck by a heavy typhoon and unexpectedly, and the cargo, which was properly secured, goes missing. All right. So these are kind of tricky, and I think there could be litigation about a bunch of these, so there's not really a good answer. So I'm just going to pass these around, and if you even answered any of these, you get some. So basically, if you deliver your stuff, the basic rule is that stuff is delivered when it's dropped off to wherever it's supposed to be dropped off to. Now, if it's customary in whatever port you're in that you can drop things off to an empty warehouse, then it's okay. And if it's customary that, it doesn't really matter if, you deliver it to this place in Vallejo or you put this place in Novato, that's fine. But if it's not customary, then it becomes a problem. So you kind of have to see what the custom of the port is. So basically, now with the Typhoon, right, I would say that there's this exception, and we're going to go into it later, for an act of God, meaning there's no liability on the carrier if there's an act of God. So maybe the cargo wasn't technically delivered, but you've done everything you can. You're not going to be held on the hook for something that happened, even under this limited liability provision of COGSA. So what are the carrier's obligations? Does anybody know what the carrier's obligations are? Yep. Just deliver it? In one piece? That's a good answer. All right. That's a good answer. In one piece? All right. So here are the carrier's obligations. You've got to have a seaworthy vessel. So it's got to be reasonably fit for its intended use. And that can extend to the master and crew. So I'm not talking about you're on your boat and you make a navigational decision and it wasn't the best one and you hit some rough seas and maybe some of the cargo gets shaken around. I'm talking about you are negligent in your duties. You're not looking at the cargo. You're not taking care of it. You put something on deck that should be, below deck. It gets wet. It gets damaged. Now you're on the hook. Your company's on the hook. All right? There's an obligation to properly man and equip the vessel. So if you're supposed to have, a master and a mate and a bunch of ABs and 5 of the people that are supposed to be on that boat aren't there anymore, that can become a problem and that can create liability. So definitely let your company know if people are sick or aren't able to do their duties. Preserve and take proper care for special cargo. How many people have sailed already here? Okay, most of you have sailed. Awesome. Did you have what kind of cargo were you carrying? People. Okay. Anybody here sail a container ship or you? Who'd you sail for? Matson. And what were you guys transporting? Containers. Just containers? Okay. Were some of the containers reefer containers or anything like that? Yeah. So who would go around and check to make sure that the temperature was right and that the reefer containers were working? The reefer man. There was a reefer man? Yeah. Okay. Was he with the deck department or engineering department? Kind of both? Okay. So basically, somebody had to log that everything was okay? Mm-hmm. All right. So all of that basically comes down to the crew. So basically taking care for the cargo, making sure that if things have to be set at 60 degrees, that they're remaining at 60 degrees. Properly loading and stowing the cargo, so the way things are lashed down, if the hatches need to be covered, then making sure that they're down and up. All of that. So any questions about that? Deviations by the carrier. So does anybody here know what a deviation is? Obvious? You. What does it mean to deviate? Exactly. So you change what you're supposed to do, right? So basically, maybe you were supposed to go from Hawaii directly to Guam, but you have to go somewhere else because there's a problem, right? So that could be a deviation. Now, if that deviation is not an issue unless it results in damage. So let's say the reefer container is only supposed to be working for about 7 days. They didn't use the best one, but it should have lasted on the voyage from Hawaii to Guam. But now you have to go somewhere else, and the container's not going to keep stuff cool that long. Now you've got a problem, so now your deviation could have resulted in damage. And then when I wrote SOLAS, I meant safety of life at sea, not SOLAS like the other international convention. So that's an exception to when a carrier can always deviate. So just deviating isn't a problem unless it can cause damage to the cargo. So you've got to use due diligence. basically, you have to use your best, do what you're supposed to make sure that the vessel is seaworthy when the cargo is loaded. If, for instance, you know that something on board that vessel isn't right, like, I don't know, there's wastage in one of the cargo holds and there's water coming in and you put cargo in there anyway, then definitely the carrier's going to be liable and people are going to start asking questions. So that's why, like, if that's a problem, before you load the cargo, you have to let people know, because that way you'll keep the company from getting sued, and it helps you preserve your license and not have problems later on down the line. Everybody knows what it means for a vessel to be seaworthy, right? All right. Anyone here ever see an issue with loading cargo or a problem where cargo couldn't be loaded because of something wrong with the vessel? Nope. Yep. Can you give an example? So did you just not load into that particular tank, or?
Yeah, lucky we were on the way to the shipyard anyway.
Okay, so it worked out. All right. So basically, just use your due diligence. So what are the shipper's obligations? So basically, if there's something dangerous about the cargo, some special characteristic of the cargo, they have to let you know. So I once had a case where my client was a shipper. They were shipping cell phones, and somebody put their cell phones next to these like industrial floor scrubbing machines, where this machine, there was supposed to be a wire that was supposed to have been unplugged. The batteries were supposed to be disconnected, but somebody forgot to do that. Well, those machines combusted. There was a huge fire. It damaged the cell phones. So actually, it was the shipper of those machines that was on the hook for the damage, because they were supposed to disclose the nature of their cargo. They were supposed to properly package their cargo. They didn't, so they were the ones on the hook. So the shipper is supposed to let you know if there's something special about their cargo that can create a problem. Yes.
Does that happen often, that the shippers don't fully disclose what's inside the containers and then they're the problem with the problem?
So they are supposed to disclose, what they're shipping, and obviously the carrier should be finding out. In this case, it wasn't really fully that they didn't disclose. It was more that they didn't disconnect part of the machine that they were supposed to. But, I think with smaller shippers, it can be a problem. So you definitely want to look at what people declared on, like, what they said their cargo was on the bill of lading. I know that, and you definitely want to make sure that things are separated out the way they're supposed to be separated out, so that if there is a problem with one package, it doesn't create a problem for everything else. But there is a requirement that they notify you. So if there is a problem, then that's a good response. The shipper has to deliver the cargo in good condition. So, and they have to notify you or notify your company of any damage after delivery. So that's what the shippers have to do. So exceptions. So basically, these are exceptions to when something might get delivered and it's damaged, or it's not delivered, it's lost, but the carrier is still not on the hook. So there's pretty much a long list of exceptions. I think COGSA is very carrier friendly. So if there was like a navigational error, not something that was grossly negligent, but like we said, maybe you went the wrong way, there were some rough seas, stuff got shaken around, that might be an exception to liability. Fire, unless it was caused by somebody's fault. Now, most of the fires I've seen on vessels were usually due to somebody doing something wrong, most of the time. So that's a really hard one. Even if there is a fire, there's still a good chance that somebody's going to want to look into what caused that fire. Perils, dangers, accidents of the sea, acts of God, so like the typhoon, acts of war, acts of public enemies. That could even be like a piracy act. Arrest or restraint of princes, rulers, seizure. I have never seen that, but if any of you have, I'd be interested. Quarantine restrictions, I highlighted that because that's going to be a big issue right now. Right now we're screening vessels coming in to see if people are sick, have been in China in the past 14 days, and we keep expanding which countries people can't come in from. So I'm sure there's going to be some problems with cargo because of quarantine restrictions. So that's an exception to liability. Acts or omissions of the shipper, owner of the goods, agent or representative, yes.
So for Part G,
Part G.
could you go into detail about that? Is that basically like if a leader or something like that stops the ship from leaving?
It's basically if a country, for some political reason, isn't allowing the ship in or not letting. I mean, Venezuela might be a good example. I could see something like that happening there.
Okay.
But I haven't actually ever seen this
Oh, okay.
exception come into play yet. But I will give you this for asking the question. Somebody else asked a question. Someone over there. You? You get this. All right, cool. So just as a reminder, like think about basically acts by other countries for things we can't control, like war, when you think about these exceptions. Some other exceptions. Strikes, so if there's like a labor strike, that would be a good exception. Riots, civil commotions. If you have to save somebody at sea and that's the reason for your delay or the reason for cargo damage, then that would be a good exception. Let's say you're transporting a bunch of life rafts somewhere else and your life raft's not working, so you open up the container and you take out this life raft and you throw it and now it's damaged. Well, you were saving someone's life, so that's a good exception. Basically, insufficient package. There's numerous exceptions. You guys can learn the list. There is a catch-all. So the catch-all is latent defects not discoverable by due diligence. Oh, and any other cause arising without the actual fault and privity of the carrier. So if the carrier couldn't control it, just think about it that way, then it's probably an exception. So Godzilla comes and destroys all the cargo, that would be an exception. So damages. How are we calculating damages? It's going to be the market value at destination. So if you're shipping your pineapples on your Matson boat from Hawaii here, and these pineapples are selling for $10 a pineapple in California, well, that's going to be your market value at destination, or the declared value, or $500 per package unit. So depending on how you listed those pineapples, if they were each in their own little box, then you're really lucky. You can get your full $10 per pineapple because it's going to be less than the $500. Basically, that's how it's all decided. You can always get $500 per unit, but you can never get more than $500 per unit. But if you have a box with something that's worth less than $500, you're going to get the lower dollar value, yes.
How does that, per package unit, how's that measured?
So that's a good question. On the bill of lading, it's going to say 50 boxes of pineapples.
Oh, like in a container.
Right, or however they measure it, right? So let's say you have a car in a container, because I've had this. I had a Ferrari in a container, and it was one car. So the liability that the carrier had to pay for the damaged Ferrari, no matter how much money it cost them to fix it, was $500. So it really depends how it's listed. Now, sometimes it's listed in tonnage. So if it's measured in tonnage units, then it's going to be $500 per tonnage unit.
How does this change, with the Ferrari, a row ship, as opposed to
It really all depends on what the bill of lading says. So if the bill of lading says one car, then it's going to be one car. If they're measuring the cars in their weight, in tonnage, then the liability will be based on the tonnage. Yes.
So the Ferrari example is based off of moving a car to resale or something, or
Somebody's private car that had a lot of money was. I can't even remember now where they were shipping it, but I do remember I got the case from a German attorney, so I think maybe it was coming from Germany, maybe to the U.S. I'm not really sure,
Okay.
but it was a car. I think it was to the U.S. and it was a car in a container. There was some damage. I think they were able to fix it, but obviously it cost a lot more than $500 to fix. Yes.
I don't know if you've ever dealt with that, but what's the trickiest part about dealing with the cases where the containers fall overboard and then they wash up on the beaches and everyone raids the beaches of all that stuff? How does that?
I mean, ultimately, I've never seen anybody go after the people that raid the beaches. If the container falls overboard, there's going to be a loss, and it's going to come down. People are going to want to look at how the cargo is secured, like it's going to be a securing issue. So probably the carrier is going to be on the hook for that container. Ultimately, yes.
I have a question on that, because usually, like, the longshoremen load and they secure the cargo, but then when you head out to sea, like, the mates and stuff are responsible
That's right.
for how everything's loaded and stuff, and so if there's a problem on shore and they didn't, like, lash it down correctly and they go out to sea with it, it still falls on the mate.
It's not necessarily going to fall on the mate, but you are supposed to look at the cargo securing manual, right? And you're supposed to check that all the lashings are correct. So it will still fall on the carrier if you can show. That's why it's important to log everything, right? If somebody else put it down and they did something that you couldn't have discovered, then that's going to be your response. But that's why your logs are so important. So again, yes.
I guess a better way of putting my question was, if it's based on market value at its destination and say it's personal effects or something like that, it's not going to market, is it just the market value? Or
Yeah, it's whatever the standard value is. I mean, if you're shipping your furniture or something like that,
yeah.
it really depends. I mean, most people that ship stuff do have insurance, so it's really the insurance company that's recovering this $500 a package. Not mostly. It could be the person, but it's gonna be based on what the bill of lading says, right? So if it says 1 box of personal effects, then they're only gonna get $500. If it says, 50 boxes or whatever, it should be based on that. I have never had a case with somebody's personal effects like that, maybe once, actually. It's a long time ago. But it was limited, somewhat under COGSA. So insufficient packaging. This is a good defense for the carriers if the shipper didn't package things correctly. So I did have a case. My client was the insurance company for Corning. It's public record, so I'm not breaching any privilege here. Basically, they were shipping glass to Japan to make television sets. This is before I was in the Coast Guard, obviously. And the company that was shipping their glass, which I can't remember who, it might have been Maersk, but I can't even remember now, claimed that Corning didn't know how to pack glass. Now, obviously, Corning that manufactures glass had a pretty good response to this. Because that's all they do is pack and ship glass. But I could see an example of, and I have seen cases where people just weren't packaging things correctly. So that is basically a defense to the carrier's liability, is insufficient packaging. Now, there's the shipper has to prove that the carrier received their cargo in good condition. If they can't prove that, then that's another defense that the carrier might have, is we got it wasn't in good condition. So what helps a carrier prove that, what helps a shipper prove that the carrier received their cargo in good condition? One is a clean bill of lading. So you issue the shipper a bill of lading saying, yeah, we got your boxes, it all looks good. You don't take any exception, like, hey, we got your 50 boxes, but this one was a little bit bent, or it looked like there might have been water damage to this other one. That's prima facie proof that there was delivery in good condition. Now, what about when everything is boxed up and you can't see it? Obviously you're going to write that. So that's going to be something that's going to be debated later on if there's a case. Or perishable food. The shipper's going to have to try to prove that when they gave it to you, that it was in good condition, that the food wasn't damaged already. I had a case where a bunch of grapes were shipped. They were shipped from Chile to Philadelphia, and there were reefer containers. The grapes were put in reefer containers, and when they got to Philly, basically all the grapes had, nobody would want to eat them, let's put it that way. So, there was a question about, did the shipper, the company that, packaged all these grapes in Chile, were they in good condition? And luckily, this company had amazing records, like down to the wire, like what temperature everything was at, how long it had been since things were harvested. They had videotapes, so we were actually able to prove delivery in good condition.
Just real quick, we haven't used the term prima facie yet. Can you let everybody know the definition?
Basically just like basically on its face, so it's proof or evidence that something is as it is, right? Like you take it as you see it. Does that make sense? Okay. And delivery and damage condition. Obviously, if you're making a claim, you also have to prove that your stuff was delivered to you in damaged condition. And then you have to give notice to the carrier. So if your duck arrives and it looks like that, and it looked like that nice fluffy one when you shipped it, does anybody know how long you have to tell the carrier that there was a problem with your duck? Nope.
2 weeks.
Too much time, guys. I mean, do you really want someone to like wait a whole 2 weeks to let you know that you're close?
72.
Whoever said 72 hours is right. So 3 days. It's 3 days. So they don't. Basically, yeah, 3 days. You have 3 days to look at your stuff and let people know if it wasn't delivered in good condition. Now, you might have a little bit longer if, like, let's say you had like something that you could prove the carrier intentionally hid the damage from you or did something to hide the damage from you, or it wasn't readily discoverable for that reason. That might be the only time that you might have a little bit more time. So delivery is presumed to be made to the carrier in good condition. So again, that clean bill of lading is prima facie evidence. If you get something and it doesn't look right, write it down on the bill of lading and let people know right away. Don't just take it, because the fact that you just, signed off on everything as being good is proof that it was in good condition when you got it. Notice has to be given to the carrier in 3 days. And again, that 3-day rule can be rebuttable. So if something's hidden, somebody may have a little bit more time. There is a duty to mitigate damages. So like if you ship your pineapples from Hawaii to here, and 50 of them are spoiled, but 50 of them are still good, it's not like you can claim for 100 pineapples. You have to still try to sell the 50 that are good, even if it means going through a box of 100 pineapples to pull out that 50. But there is an exception to that. So you only need to mitigate damages if the cost of mitigation is less than the cost of the goods. So if you're going to have to spend like $1,000 to have somebody rummaging through a box of pineapples and you're only going to be able to sell them for $500, then it's probably not worth it. And then another issue that might come into play is brand reputation. So I've seen this happen where there's a duty to mitigate, and like maybe like somebody's shipping cans of soup, for instance, like Campbell soup. And Campbell has like a reputation of being like a prime brand. You get it in the grocery store, you kind of know what you're getting. And now all these cans are kind of warped, but maybe the soup is still good. And someone's like, well, Campbell, you can sell it to like the secondhand grocery store and they'll take it for half the price. Well, they may not have a duty to mitigate because they don't want everyone to associate Campbell soup with a bunch of crinkled up cans. So there are some exceptions to that. Privity of contract. Does everybody in here know what privity is? Because that's another... All right. So basically... How am I going to explain this? All right. I want $5 for this. Can I take your $5? This is your $5. Can I take this for a second?
Yes.
All right. So now we have an agreement. We have a contract. Now let's say you tell him, hey, if you give me $2, I can, get us both this. Yeah, you get us $2. Now you guys have privity of contract, but I don't have a contract with you. But if you have an agreement with me that in exchange for this, I'm going to get $5, and I'm like, all right, you have to take this, get this to New York, right? Now we have privity of contract. You might subcontract that to other people, but the contract between us that's where there's privity of contract. So your agreements with them, it doesn't matter to me. You're the only one I can sue, basically. And if your agreement with me says I can basically subcontract, this to all these other people to get your Snickers bar to New York, then I can only sue you, and anything they do, I can sue you for it. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. All right. You can still have this. There you go. All right. Cool. So who do the shippers usually have privity of contract with? The common carriers, the people that are moving the stuff. The non-vessel operator common carrier. So basically it's somebody who kind of, did they do charter parties yet?
Nope.
All right, so basically somebody rents out a boat or part of the boat to basically ship cargo on it, or even just maybe a container. And then that company issues a bill of lading to whoever they contract with. That's the non-vessel operating common carrier. So whoever, if cargo gets damaged on a Maersk boat, but I bought my transit from, I don't know, third-party carrier somewhere else who basically rented space from Maersk, they're the ones I'm going to sue. Freight forwarder, is there privity of contract with them? Does everybody know what a freight forwarder is? All right, so freight forwarders are going to be the ones that help people get their contracts for carriage, but they're not actually the ones doing any of the carrying. So basically, there is no privity of contract with the freight forwarder for transport of goods. And what about subcontractors? Well, it kind of depends. It kind of depends on my agreement. Now, if he told me that when I gave him that Snickers bar for $5, like, I could not only sue him, but this is who else he's contracting with, and I can sue them as well for any damage. Now I might have some privity of contract with them. But if it's just, me and him, then probably not. There's something that's called a Himalaya clause that exists in pretty much every bill of lading I've ever seen. So basically it extends the benefits and limitations of COGSA to the subcontractors of the carrier. So again, if he hires the rest of you to transport a candy bar as his subcontractors and he's got a Himalaya clause in his bill of lading, I can't sue you for more than $500 because you damaged it. So
Just like maritime trade, or is that?
that's generally true for most different types of carriage contracts. We're about to talk about the Carmack Amendment. Now, again, if my bill of lading with you or my transport agreement with you says you can't subcontract this, now maybe there is a reason that, well, then I could probably go after you anyway for subcontracting it to somebody that we didn't agree was going to take it. So the Carmack Amendment, just so you know a bit about the other laws that involve transport of cargo that could come into play, though it doesn't really apply to vessels. The Carmack Amendment applies to inland carriage. So that's for basically truck and rail carriage. There's also kind of a limitation of liability under the Carmack Amendment. In order for a trucker, for instance, to benefit from this, they also have to offer 2 rates. And they have to have something called a tariff. It doesn't have to be put on their freight bill which is what they call their bills of lading freight bills. They don't have to put it on there. Like in COGSA, it kind of has to be on there. They can just keep it in a desk drawer. As long as they have it, they can limit their liability. And it could be something like 50 cents a pound even. They're usually pretty low. What's interesting about this is, let's say you have a vessel that takes cargo let's say you're Maersk, and you agree to transport cargo from Hawaii all the way to New York, right? Now, you're probably not going to take it all the way to New York, or let's say it's Chicago, all right, middle of the country. You're not going to get there on a ship, right? You're going to need to get it there some other way once it comes into a port. So let's say you come to a port in LA. Now you're going to get it on a train, or you're going to put it on a truck, and you're going to take it to Chicago, right? Usually the bill of lading that's issued is a through bill of lading. It's not just a bill of lading for transit from Hawaii to LA, but a bill of lading from Hawaii all the way to Chicago. Now, there were some cases that involved, well, what law applies on the transit, the inland transit, once it hits the U.S., for instance, from the port all the way inland. So ultimately, the decision was, if there's a through bill of lading, it doesn't matter that there was a separate contract that Maersk had with Union Pacific Railways to take the stuff to Chicago. What really matters is the contract that you had, which was basically a through bill of lading that began with an ocean carriage bill of lading, and that's what's going to apply. So COGSA would still apply. If Carmack did apply, like if your shipper had purchased 2 separate bills of lading, one for the ocean carriage and one for the rail transit, then they have a little bit more time to give notice of damage. basically they have 9 months basically to give notice of damage. They have a 2-year statute of limitations instead of a 1-year statute of limitations. And basically, if there was any damage while the stuff was in transit inland, rail or truck, it's strict liability. So it's actually a lot more friendly to the shipper of the cargo. And then the Montreal Protocol is what applies to, yes?
So if you hire mares to bring something to Chicago, you have to take that railway like you were saying. Is the shipper on the rail viewed as a subcontractor legally?
Yeah, so like Union Pacific would be like a subcontractor of Maersk almost. They would be covered by that Himalaya clause in the bill of lading. So remember we were talking about privity of contract and hiring other people to take things like part of the way? That's what would apply. So Montreal Protocol, this is what applies to air carriage. It's kind of like COGSA for air carriers. If you're the shipper, or the consignee is actually the person that receives it. So I don't know if I used that word before, but the consignee is the person that actually is supposed to accept the goods on the other side. So if you're the consignee and you get something and it's damaged by air, you have 15 days to provide notice. You get an airway bill instead of a bill of lading. There is a written notice requirement, and the limitation for this is in SDR's special drawing rights per kilo. It's like basically a fake monetary construct that was made mostly for all these different international agreements about how much things should cost. But an SDR right now, I looked it up today, is like $1.32. So 22 times 132 is the rate, and this just changed. It was like 19 SDRs per kilo until very recently. And the limitation of liability for air carriage is based on the chargeable weight. And again, you could have something that goes part of the way by ship and then part of the way by air, and you'd have to look at which bill of lading it was being, whether it was an airway bill that was issued or a bill of lading for ocean carriage that was issued to decide which limitation would apply. So the Rotterdam rules. Does anybody know what these are? All right, so apparently there are supposed to be rules that are supposed to come out. I actually asked a friend of mine the other day, because I was coming to teach you, if there had been any headway on this. And he told me that he and I had been in, I guess, some sort of Christmas party in 2009 or 10, where we were told that these Rotterdam rules, which are supposed to replace COGSA, were going to come out any day now. And I think it's like 2020 now, so 10 years later. And you can see how fast the law changes, because supposedly they're coming, but they still haven't come out. So they're supposed to come soon. They were signed in 2009. They're intended to extend or increase the liability that we see in COGSA 2 and 3 SDRs per kilo limit. So it's that SDRs that I was talking about earlier. There's supposed to be a 2-year statute of limitations instead of a 1-year statute. And there are a few less excuses that are supposed to be available to the carrier. Now, this hasn't happened yet, so again, it's been, yes?
What do they think the benefit is of increasing?
Well, if you were shipping a Ferrari and you only got, I mean, it's, has anybody here kind of heard anything about like the demurrage issues right now with cargo kind of being left at the port, and like people are being charged all sorts of demurrage, and like basically the stuff isn't even worth what the demurrage fees are? It's not really necessarily fair to the person whose cargo it is sitting there that can't get it and is paying like thousands and thousands of dollars in demurrage fees for like $1,000 worth of cargo. It's the same thing, right? Like there has to be some equity. So that's what it is. It's equity. All right, so I just want you all to know that thanks to the Coast Guard, there were no rubber ducks harmed in the making of this PowerPoint. And if any of you are interested in the Coast Guard after this, please talk to me. Yes?
What do we do in the Coast Guard?
What do we do?
No.
Oh, what do I do? So, okay, I came into the Coast Guard as a lawyer. I was a maritime lawyer before I came into the Coast Guard. I practiced law here for 4 years in the Coast Guard. I practiced maritime law for like 6 years, and I was a lawyer for like 9 years before the Coast Guard. So now what I do for the past year and a half is vessel inspections. I actually completely changed my career. So I'm the one who's actually inspecting the cargo holds, and I'm the one going down the engine room and making sure you can do your steering test. I'm in charge of the towing vessel division. So if any of you know about Subchapter M, yes? All right, if you plan to at all, like, bring a towing vessel into the Port Arthur, Texas area, I'll be the one that's issuing your COI or looking at your boat if there needs to be an inspection. So it's my division. All right, so
Thank you, Tammy.
thanks.